I discovered my dad has another family 3 towns over with kids the same ages as me and my siblings, so I invited them all to our Thanksgiving. 3 weeks ago, I borrowed my dad's car to pick up pizza, just a normal Tuesday night errand. I reached under the seat looking for the aux cord, and my hand hit something hard. An iPhone, but not Dad's iPhone. Dad's phone was inside in his pocket. This phone had no password. It opened right up. First thing I saw was a text message. I miss you, Daddy. When are you coming home? Sender name, Jessica. Daughter. I don't have a sister named Jessica. I clicked on the photos. My hands started shaking. There was my dad standing next to a woman I'd never seen, his arm around her waist, 3 kids in front of them, a girl who looked 8, a boy around 12, a teenage girl next to them, all smiling like a normal family. I scrolled through the gallery. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, beach vacations. Dad was in every single photo, smiling, lifting the kids in the air. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, then took the phone inside to my room. Over the next 3 days, I became a detective. Dad's work schedule said he traveled Monday through Wednesday every week. He'd done it my entire life. I checked the GPS history on the secret phone. Same address kept coming up, 45 minutes away. I drove there Tuesday afternoon. Nice house, 2-story. At 3:30, a school bus stopped. The 3 kids got off and walked inside. At 4:15, Dad's car pulled up. The 8-year-old ran out screaming, "Daddy!" and jumped into his arms. This wasn't just an affair. This was a whole separate life. I went home and checked our bank statements. You see, Mom had started working double shifts recently because Dad told us his company cut pay. We all ate once a day to save money. But Dad's work emails showed a different story. He'd actually gotten promoted recently, and every 2 weeks, he was sending his other family half of his paycheck. Horror dawned on me when I thought back to last summer. Dad opened up to Mom about his alcohol issues and checked himself into mandatory rehab for 8 weeks. We all cried for days. I checked the other wife's Facebook with shaking hands and found an album titled Costa Rica Family Trip. 8 weeks of photos. Dad on beaches, at zip lines. The dates matched. He was jet skiing while we prayed for him to get better. Then I found the mortgage documents. Dad took a second mortgage on our house 6 months ago, $150,000. He told Mom it was for emergency medical bills for his sister. The other wife's Facebook from 6 months ago showed a brand new outdoor swimming pool and kitchen, upgrades to the house. My family was drowning in debt for their pool. Thanksgiving was happening in 3 days. I made a fake Facebook profile, friended the other wife. She accepted. I messaged, "Hi, organizing a Christensen family reunion. John, my dad, would love you and the kids over for Thanksgiving." Then sent our address. She replied, "We'd love to come. John is always busy on Thanksgiving, so this is fabulous. What time? 3 o'clock. Show up without a word. I want it to be a surprise for him." She replied with a smiley face. Thanksgiving Day arrived. Mom cooked all morning. My sister Emma set the table. Dad watched football like everything was normal. The doorbell rang at 3. Dad got up. "I'll get it." He opened the door, expecting my mom's brother. A woman holding pumpkin pie stood there instead. 3 kids behind her. She smiled at him. "Surprise, honey. We're here for the reunion." She kissed Dad's cheek and looked behind Dad. Mom was staring intently. "John?" my mom said slowly. "Who is this?" Dad's face went ghost white. Mom walked over. "Who are you?" "I'm Tom's wife." "Who are you?" "No, I'm Tom's wife." The woman's pie hit the porch and shattered. Then everyone started screaming. "You told me they died," the other wife sobbed. "You said you were a widower." Mom grabbed the doorframe. 16 years, I shouted, my voice cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to me. "He's been doing this 16 years. We've been married for 14, the other wife whispered. "We've been married 23, Mom said. I pulled out printed papers, bank statements, mortgage documents, photos. The other wife's hands shook reading it. "And this?" I showed the mortgage papers to Mom. $150,000. Same month as their new pool and kitchen. My mom's face went red. "You mortgaged our house for their pool and kitchen." The other wife was crying. "He told me he travels for work. Gone Thursday through Sunday. He's with us Thursday to Sunday," Mom said. "Monday to Wednesday he's with us," the other wife sobbed. Both women looked at Dad. He stood between both families. Everyone was screaming. He tried to talk, but no one was listening. Finally, he yelled over everyone. "You want an explanation? Fine. Sit down, all of you." Both wives started. "We're not—" Dad cut them off, voice cold. "There's a reason I did this. A reason none of you know. And when you hear it, you'll realize I'm not the villain you think I am." He looked at me. "You wanted everyone together? Fine. Let's have Thanksgiving dinner. All of us. And I'll tell you exactly why I've been living 2 lives for 16 years. Mom's voice cut through everything like a knife. "Everyone sit down right now." Her tone was different from I'd ever heard it. Dad turned toward the door like he was going to bolt. The other wife stepped right in front of him, blocking his path. Her face was red, and her hands were shaking. "You're not leaving until you explain every single thing." Dad looked at both women, then at all the kids staring at him, then back at the door. "I need some air." The other wife didn't move. "No, you talk. Now." Mom walked past everyone into the living room. "Get in here, all of you." We shuffled inside like zombies. Mom and Emma sat on one couch. The other wife herded her 3 kids onto the other couch. The 8-year-old was crying. The teenage girl looked like she wanted to disappear. The 12-year-old boy just stared at the floor. Dad stood in the middle of the room between both families. He looked smaller somehow. He cleared his throat. "I know you're all angry, but you need to understand something. I compartmentalized my life to protect everyone. I never meant to hurt anyone. I worked so hard to keep both families safe and happy." His voice was shaking, but the words sounded practiced, like he'd rehearsed this speech in his head. "I juggled schedules and finances and holidays because I loved you all. I couldn't choose. I couldn't let anyone down." Mom's face was stone. Emma was crying silently next to her. The other wife suddenly sat up straight. "Wait, why does everyone keep calling you Tom?" Everyone went quiet. "Your name is David. David Christensen." The room felt like all the air got sucked out. Mom turned to look at Dad. "What?" The other wife looked confused and scared. "His name is David. We've been married 14 years. His name is David." I felt my stomach drop. "Mom, his name is Tom. Tom Christensen. That's what's on our birth certificates." The other wife's face went white. "No. His driver's license says David. His work ID says David. His credit cards say David." Dad opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Mom stood up so fast the couch moved. Her whole body was shaking. "You have 10 minutes. 10 minutes to get your things and get out of my house." Her voice was cold and steady, in a way I'd never heard before. "I'm changing the locks tonight. If you come back without my permission, I'm calling the police." Dad started to say something. "But 10 minutes. Starting now." Mom crossed her arms. Dad looked at both wives, then at all the kids, then headed for the stairs. I followed him. My hands went into my pockets, and I felt the secret phone. Dad went into the bedroom and started throwing clothes into a duffel bag. I walked past him to his office. My hands were shaking, so hard I could barely hold my own phone steady. I opened the file cabinet. Insurance papers. I took a photo. Bank statements. Another photo. The image was blurry. I had to retake it 3 times. Property documents. Photo. Tax returns. Photo. I knew if I didn't get this stuff now, it might disappear forever. Dad walked past the office door with his bag. "What are you doing?" "Nothing." I kept taking photos. He didn't stop to argue. I heard him go back downstairs. I opened his desk drawers. Credit card bills. Photos. More bank statements. Photos. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, but I kept going. I heard voices downstairs. Footsteps. The front door opened and closed. I came downstairs with the secret phone in my pocket. The other wife was standing by the door with her kids. They were all crying. She walked over to Mom. They both had tears running down their faces. "Can I give you my number?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Mom nodded. They both pulled out their phones with shaking hands. The other wife typed her number into Mom's phone. "We should talk. When we're both calmer." Mom nodded again. They both looked completely broken, but somehow they were on the same side now. The other wife gathered her kids and walked out. The door closed. Emma was sitting on the stairs crying. Mom just stood in the hallway staring at nothing. I went up to my room. I sat at my laptop and plugged in the secret phone. Emma came in and sat next to me without saying anything. I started exporting everything. Text messages, photos, GPS locations, emails, every single piece of evidence from 16 years of lies. The progress bar moved so slowly. Emma just sat there next to me. Neither of us talked. We just watched files copy from the phone to my computer to my cloud storage. 3 hours passed. My back hurt from sitting. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. But I didn't stop until every single file was backed up in 3 different places. Past midnight, my phone started buzzing. Text from Dad. Long paragraphs about how he was trying to give both families good lives. How he worked so hard to keep everyone happy. How he didn't understand the pressure he was under. How he had to balance everything. How it wasn't fair that we were all against him. I read it and felt sick. These were manipulation tactics. I could see it even through my exhaustion. He was making himself the victim. He was trying to make us feel bad for him. I showed the texts to Mom. She read them and blocked his number without saying a word. Friday morning came too fast. None of us slept. Mom was on the phone with a locksmith by 8. "Yes, I need all the locks changed today. All of them. Front door, back door, garage, everything." The locksmith arrived at 10. We watched him drill out the old locks and install new ones. Emma sat at the kitchen table with Mom's laptop changing passwords. Bank account, email, streaming services, phone bill, everything that Dad had access to. We were taking back control piece by piece. Each new lock felt like we were building a wall between us and him. Each new password felt like closing a door he couldn't open anymore. The locksmith handed Mom a set of new keys. She held them in her hand, and I saw her shoulders relax just a little bit. I opened our bank account on my phone while the locksmith was finishing up. I scrolled through recent transactions. There was a pattern. Every 2 weeks, right after Dad's paycheck deposited, there was a transfer labeled savings. But it wasn't going to our savings account. It was going to an account number I didn't recognize. I clicked on the transfer history. It went back years. Every single paycheck. Like clockwork. The amounts matched perfectly with his pay schedule. He'd been systematically sending money to his other family for years while telling us we had to eat once a day to save money. I showed Mom. She stared at the screen. Her hands started shaking again. He told me we couldn't afford groceries. Her voice cracked. I kept scrolling. The transfers added up to thousands and thousands of dollars. Money that should have been feeding us. Money that should have been paying our bills. Money that went to build their pool and remodel their kitchen while we went hungry. I closed the banking app and sat there staring at nothing. My brain kept trying to make the numbers make sense, but they wouldn't. Every 2 weeks for years. Like clockwork. The kitchen light flicked on behind me and I jumped. Emma stood in the doorway. Her eyes were red and puffy. She walked over and leaned against the counter next to where I was sitting. Neither of us said anything for a minute. Then she asked what happens when people at the school find out. Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked up at her. She was picking at her thumbnail and not making eye contact. She said everyone would know her as the girl whose dad had a secret family. She said people would whisper and stare and ask questions she couldn't answer. She said she didn't know how to go back to the school on Monday and pretend everything was normal. I didn't have a good answer for her. I told her I didn't know. She nodded like she expected that. Then she asked if I thought Mom was going to be okay. I said I didn't know that either. Emma wiped her eyes with her sleeve and went back upstairs. I sat there alone in the dark kitchen for another hour. Saturday morning, Mom was up before dawn. I found her at the kitchen table with a notebook and her phone. She had a list of numbers written down. Banks, lawyers, insurance companies. She looked up when I came in and said she was scheduling a meeting at the bank for Monday morning. She picked up her phone and dialed. I poured coffee and listened to her side of the conversation. Her voice was steady and firm. She told the person on the phone that she needed to review all accounts and loans connected to our address. The person must have asked why because Mom paused and then said there had been some irregularities she needed to investigate. Another pause. The bank person sounded confused from what I could hear. Mom repeated that she needed everything pulled for review. All accounts, all loans, everything. The person finally agreed, and Mom wrote down a time, 9:30 Monday morning. She hung up and made a check mark next to the bank on her list. Then she moved to the next number. I went to Dad's home office after Mom got off the phone. His desk was still covered in papers from when I'd searched it on Thursday. I pulled out the secret phone and opened his work email. Then I grabbed his pay stubs from the file drawer. I laid them out side by side on the desk. The most recent pay stub showed his salary. Then I found the email from 8 months ago about his promotion. The new salary was 30% higher than what he'd been making. My hands started shaking as I did the math. He got promoted 8 months ago. The same time he told us his pay got cut. The same time Mom started working double shifts. The same time we started eating once a day to save money. I pulled up more emails, performance reviews, bonus notifications. Everything showed he was doing great at work, getting raises, getting promoted, making more money than ever. And he told us we were broke. He told us we had to ration food. He watched Mom work herself into exhaustion, all while his paycheck kept growing. Sunday evening, I called the other wife. My finger hovered over her number for 5 minutes before I finally pressed it. She answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded tired. I asked if she had time to compare some documents with me. She said yes immediately. We spent the next hour going through dates and receipts. She had bank statements from her accounts. I had statements from ours. She had photos with dates. I had GPS data from the secret phone. Every time she filled in a gap in my timeline, I wrote it down. Every time I gave her information she didn't have, I heard her gasp or swear softly. We matched up his travel schedule. Monday through Wednesday with us. Thursday through Sunday with them. No gaps, no overlaps. Perfect precision. She told me about receipts for flowers he brought her. I checked our credit card statements and found the charges. She told me about weekend trips they took. I found the hotel charges on our cards. By the end of the call, we had a complete record. Everything documented. Everything proven. She thanked me before hanging up. Her voice broke when she said it. I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop after the call ended. Created columns for dates and locations and which family he was with. Started entering everything we'd just discussed. I color-coded it. Blue for our family, red for theirs. I matched each entry against bank transactions, against GPS data from the secret phone, against photos and receipts and emails. The pattern that came together made me feel sick. He had scheduled his entire life down to the hour. Every Monday morning he left our house at 7. Every Wednesday night he came home at 6. Every Thursday morning he left for his other house. Every Sunday night he came back to us. 16 years of this. Not a single deviation. Not a single mistake. Until I found that phone. I saved the spreadsheet in 3 different places, backed it up to the cloud, emailed it to myself. This was evidence. This was proof. This couldn't disappear. Monday morning, Mom's phone started ringing at 8. Dad's name showed up on the screen. Mom stared at it. Her finger moved toward the answer button, then stopped. Hovered there. The phone kept ringing. I watched her face cycle through about 6 different emotions. Then she declined the call. The phone immediately started ringing again. Same name. She declined it again. It rang a 3rd time. This time, she answered. But instead of saying hello, she just held the phone and waited. I could hear Dad's voice from across the room, loud and fast, talking over himself. Mom listened for about 30 seconds. Then she interrupted him. She said all communication goes through email from now on. She said she wanted a record of everything. No more phone calls where he could twist words or make her doubt herself. Dad's voice got louder. Mom hung up. Then she went into her settings and blocked his number. She set the phone down on the table. Her hands were shaking, but her jaw was set hard. I spent Monday afternoon booking appointments, called a law office and scheduled a consultation for Mom on Tuesday. The receptionist asked what kind of case and I said family law. She didn't ask for details. Then I called a therapist's office that took our insurance, got an intake appointment for Wednesday, then a financial advisor for Thursday. Each time I made an appointment, I felt slightly less helpless, like we were doing something instead of just drowning, taking action instead of waiting for things to happen to us. I wrote all the appointments on the calendar, gave Mom the details. She nodded and added them to her phone. Emma asked if she needed to go to the therapy appointment. Mom said yes, all 3 of us. We were doing this together. Monday night, Mom called Emma and me into the living room. We sat on the couch and she sat in the chair across from us. She said she wanted to talk about warning signs she should have seen. Her voice was quiet, but steady. She said Dad always insisted on handling all the finances alone. Got angry if she asked questions. She said she once suggested going with him on a business trip, and he exploded. Yelled at her for not trusting him. Made her feel guilty for even asking. She said he always kept his phone face down, always took calls in another room, always had an excuse for why he couldn't do something or be somewhere. She said she explained it all away, told herself he was just private, just stressed about work, just needed space. Her voice broke on that last part. She said she spent over a decade making excuses for behavior that should have been red flags. Emma reached over and held Mom's hand. None of us said anything else. We just sat there together. Tuesday morning, my phone rang while I was eating breakfast. The other wife's number. I answered, and she started talking immediately. She told me about her wedding to Dad, how he cried when he proposed, how he talked about his dead wife and children, how he said he never thought he'd be ready to love again, how honored she felt that he chose her, how special she felt that he trusted her with his grief. Her voice was flat as she recounted it, like she was reading from a script, like the emotions had been drained out of the memory. I listened and took notes. Then I went and found Mom, told her what the other wife had said, watched Mom's face change. First disbelief, then rage, then something softer, something like grief. She said she could have been friends with that woman in different circumstances. She said they were both victims of the same man. She said it was weird to feel angry at someone and sorry for them at the exact same time. Tuesday at 9:30, we walked into the bank. Mom gave her name to the receptionist. A man came out a few minutes later. He introduced himself as Brooks. He shook Mom's hand and led us to a small office. He pulled up files on his computer, started reviewing the mortgage application for the second loan. His face went pale as he scrolled. He turned the monitor toward us, pointed at a signature on the screen, asked Mom if that was her signature. Mom leaned in and studied it. She said it looked close, but something was off. The loops weren't quite right. Brooks nodded slowly. He pointed at the notary stamp at the bottom of the document, said it looked irregular. The edges were blurry. The number was harder to read than it should be. He said he needed to flag this for the fraud department. He said this could be a forgery. Mom's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. I watched her process what that meant. Someone had forged her signature. Someone had stolen $150,000 using her name. That someone was her husband. I left the bank with Mom walking beside me, her face set, but her hands shaking. We got in the car and sat there for a minute without talking. Then she turned to me and said, we needed copies of everything. Every document, every photo, every text message. She said if Dad could forge her signature once, he could do it again. We drove straight to the print shop and spent $40 making duplicates of all our evidence. Mom put one set in a safe deposit box at a different bank and gave me another set to hide at my apartment. Tuesday afternoon, I drove to the county clerk's office downtown. The building smelled like old paper and floor cleaner. I filled out a public records request form and handed it to the clerk behind the counter. She typed Dad's name into her computer, and her eyebrows went up. She printed out 2 marriage certificates and slid them across the counter to me. The first one showed Dad married to Mom 23 years ago. His full legal name was listed. The second certificate showed someone named David Thomas, married to the other wife 14 years ago. I stared at the name, David Thomas. Dad's full name was Thomas David. He'd just flipped his first and middle names. The addresses on both certificates were real. Our house on one, the other wife's house on the other. Both marriages were legally filed. Both were active in the system. I took photos of both certificates with my phone and texted them to Mom. She called me immediately, and I could hear her breathing hard on the other end. She said she was calling a lawyer right now. Wednesday morning, I met Detective Les Walton at the police station. He was maybe 50 with gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. We sat in a small interview room with a table between us. I walked him through everything: the forged mortgage, the dual identities, the GPS data, the bank transfers. He took notes in a small notebook and asked specific questions about dates and amounts. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen against the table. He said forgery was a serious felony. Bigamy was complicated because Dad technically used different names. He said building a case strong enough for the DA to prosecute would take time, weeks, maybe months. He said I'd done good work gathering evidence, but they needed to verify everything independently. He asked if I could get Dad's employment records. I said I'd try. Detective Walton gave me his card and told me to call if Dad tried to contact me or showed up anywhere unexpected. He said men like Dad sometimes got desperate when their lives fell apart. Thursday morning, Emma left early for school. She'd made an appointment with her counselor to talk about how to handle questions from friends. I stayed home and made the call to Dad's company. The receptionist transferred me to HR, and a woman named Karen Dudley answered. I explained who I was and why I was calling. There was a long pause. Karen said she couldn't discuss employee information without proper authorization. I told her Detective Walton would be contacting her officially. She said she'd need to speak with her supervisor before commenting further. Her voice was professional, but I could hear discomfort underneath it. She took down my contact information and said someone would follow up. She didn't. Emma came home Thursday afternoon and seemed calmer than she'd been in days. She said the counselor helped her write out a script for what to say if people asked about Thanksgiving. Just a simple line about family issues and not wanting to talk about it. Emma practiced saying it out loud to me until it sounded natural instead of defensive. She said having a plan made her feel less scared about going back to the school. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message said she missed her daddy and wanted to know when he was coming home. It was signed with a heart emoji. I checked the contact and realized it was Jessica, the 8-year-old from Dad's other family. My first reaction was anger. Why did she have my number? Why was she texting me? Then I remembered she was just a kid who didn't understand why her whole world had exploded. I texted back carefully, saying I knew this was hard and confusing, but that grown-ups sometimes made mistakes that had big consequences. I said her dad loved her, but had to deal with some serious problems right now. She sent back a crying emoji, and I felt sick. Friday morning, Mom and I had an appointment with a family attorney named Valerie Whitaker. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown. Valerie was maybe 40 with dark hair pulled back tight. She shook our hands and led us into a conference room. Mom spread out all our documentation across the table. Bank statements, mortgage papers, the marriage certificates, printed text messages, everything. Valerie went through each document carefully, making notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finished, she looked up at Mom with a serious expression. She said we needed to file for legal separation immediately to protect Mom's assets. She said she'd request exclusive use of the house and a freeze on all joint accounts. She said this was going to be complicated and expensive, but we had strong evidence of fraud and financial abuse. Mom signed a retainer agreement right there. Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from the other wife. She said she'd met with a lawyer about getting an annulment. Her message said the lawyer thought her marriage might not be legally valid since Dad was already married when he married her. She said she was moving forward with it. Her words sounded exhausted but determined, like she was pushing through even though every step hurt. I texted back that Mom was filing for legal separation too. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji. Friday night, Dad sent a long email to both families. I saw it come through on my phone and opened it with my stomach tight. The email was 3 pages long. He wrote about how hard it had been to keep 2 families safe and provided for, how he'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to make everyone happy, how he'd sacrificed his own needs and happiness for years, how we didn't understand the pressure he was under or the impossible choices he'd had to make. He said he'd done his best in an impossible situation. I read it sitting next to Mom on the couch. When I finished, I looked over at her. She was staring at her phone screen with her jaw clenched. She said it was a justification manifesto. She said he was taking zero real responsibility and trying to make himself the victim. She said she recognized the manipulation tactics because she'd fallen for them for 23 years. Saturday morning, I was going through Dad's desk looking for more documents when I found a small key taped to the back of a drawer. It had a number stamped on it. I grabbed the secret phone and checked the GPS history for storage unit addresses. Found one 15 minutes away. I drove there and used the key to open Unit 212. Inside was like stepping into a duplicate life. Extra work clothes hanging on a rack, toiletries lined up on a shelf, holiday decorations in boxes, birthday cards, 2 sets of everything. A complete backup life ready to deploy in either household depending on which family he was with. I took photos of everything and texted them to Detective Walton. Then I started going through boxes of paperwork. Tax returns, insurance documents, bank statements going back years. At the bottom of one box, I found life insurance policy documents. I pulled them out and read through them carefully. The policy was for $500,000. Mom had been listed as the primary beneficiary for 20 years, but 6 months ago, the beneficiary had been changed to the other wife. The change of beneficiary form had Mom's signature on it, except Mom had never signed it. I knew because I'd been studying her real signature for days now. This one was close, but the loops were wrong. Dad had forged her signature again to steal her life insurance beneficiary status. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit holding the papers and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just betrayal. This was systematic theft. This was Dad erasing Mom from his life piece by piece while pretending everything was fine. I took photos of the life insurance documents and kept digging through the remaining boxes in the storage unit. At the bottom of the last file box, underneath old birthday cards and random receipts, I found a folder labeled Tax Returns 2020 to 2022 in Dad's handwriting. I pulled it out and opened it on the concrete floor next to me. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages. Dad had claimed mortgage interest deductions for both houses. He'd listed dependents from both families. He'd written off expenses for kids in 2 separate households on the same tax return. This wasn't just lying to his families anymore. This was lying to the federal government. I sat there staring at the numbers and realized Dad had been committing tax fraud for at least 3 years, probably longer. The IRS could get involved in this. Criminal charges, federal charges. I took photos of every single page, my phone camera clicking over and over in the quiet storage unit. Then I packed everything back into the boxes, locked the unit, and drove home with my stomach in knots. Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. The other wife's number showed on the screen. I answered, and she sounded exhausted. She wanted to tell me how her kids were doing because she thought Mom should know. The teenage daughter was furious and wouldn't talk to anyone, just stayed in her room with the door locked. The 12-year-old boy kept asking if it was his fault, if he'd done something wrong to make his dad leave. Jessica cried every single night asking for her daddy, and nobody could make her understand why he wasn't coming home. I listened to her voice crack as she described trying to comfort 3 kids who felt abandoned and confused. When we hung up, I walked downstairs and found Mom in the kitchen. I relayed the whole conversation word for word. Mom's face went through about 5 different emotions before settling on something that looked like tired sadness. She said those poor kids didn't deserve any of this, that they were victims, just like we were. Sunday evening around 6, I got a text from the teenage daughter asking if she could meet me to get a sweater she'd left at our house on Thanksgiving. I drove to a grocery store parking lot halfway between our houses and waited by my car. She pulled up 10 minutes later in an old sedan and got out slowly. I handed her the sweater and she took it without making eye contact. She mumbled thanks and turned to leave. I told her to wait. I said this wasn't her fault or her siblings' fault, that they were victims too, that I didn't blame them for anything. She nodded once, still not looking at me, and got back in her car. I watched her drive away and felt this weird mix of anger at Dad and sympathy for kids who were basically my half-siblings, even though we'd never known each other existed. Monday morning of week 2, I was eating breakfast when Mom's phone buzzed with a text from the other wife. A process server had just shown up at Dad's temporary rental and handed him legal papers for the separation proceedings. Within 5 minutes, both our phones started blowing up with texts from Dad. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Long paragraphs about how we were destroying him, how ungrateful we all were, how he'd sacrificed everything for both families, and this was the thanks he got. The texts kept coming, one after another, his words getting angrier and more desperate. Mom read them with her jaw clenched, and then blocked his number again. I did the same. We'd told him all communication goes through email where there's a record, but he couldn't help himself. That afternoon, Mom's phone rang from an unknown number. She answered on speaker, and a woman's voice said, this was Karen Dudley from HR at Dad's company. She was calling to notify Mom that Dad had been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into falsified travel reports. The company had discovered discrepancies in his expense claims and locations that didn't match his submitted itineraries. Karen's voice was professional but kind as she explained the situation. Mom thanked her and hung up. Then she sat down hard at the kitchen table. She said she was relieved there might be real accountability, but she was also scared about how we'd manage money if Dad had no income at all. I reminded her about the legal protections we were putting in place, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Tuesday morning, Mom's phone rang again. Brooks Malone from the bank. He said our account had been flagged for delinquency risk on the second mortgage since Dad wasn't making any payments from his frozen accounts. Brooks walked Mom through the foreclosure timeline, explaining we had about 90 days before serious action would start. He outlined options for forbearance or loan modification, but everything required documentation of the fraud and cooperation from multiple parties. Mom took notes with shaking hands, writing down deadlines and requirements. When she hung up, she looked at me and said we might lose the house. I told her we'd figure it out, but honestly, I had no idea how. Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from Detective Walton. He'd initiated a formal signature comparison analysis on the mortgage documents, sending them to a forensic document examiner. He sounded cautiously optimistic, saying the signature differences were clear enough that he thought we had solid evidence for criminal charges. But he warned me the legal process moves slowly, that building a prosecutable case takes time and patience. He said to expect weeks or even months before any charges would be filed. I thanked him and hung up, feeling this weird mix of hope and frustration. Justice was coming, but not fast enough to fix our immediate problems. Wednesday morning, Emma and I drove to our first therapy appointment with Kendra Bowden. The office was in a small professional building with beige walls and generic landscape paintings. Kendra was maybe 40, with short dark hair and a calm voice that didn't feel fake. The intake session felt awkward at first. She asked us questions about what happened and how we were coping. I didn't want to talk about my feelings, didn't want to process emotions or whatever therapy was supposed to do, but Kendra didn't push that. Instead, she focused on practical coping strategies, how to manage intrusive thoughts, how to set boundaries with Dad, how to handle people asking questions. She gave us actual tools instead of just listening and nodding. By the end of the hour, I felt like maybe this could actually help. After the session, Kendra walked us to the waiting room and handed us each a folder with written materials. She'd put together specific tools for us to use. No checking Dad's social media or the secret phone after 9 at night because it disrupted sleep and fed obsessive thoughts. A physical journal for writing down intrusive thoughts instead of letting them spiral in our heads. And permission to not forgive or understand right now, to just focus on getting through each day. Having structured boundaries around my constant evidence gathering actually made sense. That night I forced myself to put the phone away at 9 and wrote in the journal instead. I slept better than I had in 2 weeks. Wednesday evening, I was finishing my shift at my part-time job at a sporting goods store when I walked out to the parking lot and saw Dad's car. He was leaning against it, waiting. My stomach dropped. He started walking toward me fast, talking before I could get to my car. He said I'd ruined everything by inviting the other wife to Thanksgiving, that this was all my fault, that both families would still be together if I'd just minded my own business. His voice was angry and pleading at the same time. I stopped walking and looked at him. I told him all communication goes through email only, that he needed to leave. He started to argue, but I turned and walked to my car. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my voice had stayed steady. I got in, locked the doors, and drove away, while he stood there in the parking lot watching me leave. Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from the other wife, just 3 words at first. "I'm so sorry." Then a photo loaded. A canceled check made out to something called Aqua Dreams Pool Contractors. The amount was $78,000. The check came from our home equity line of credit, our address printed right there at the top. I stared at the image, feeling sick. She'd been going through her own financial records, trying to figure out what was real and what was lies. She found the pool contractor's invoice in a file box and matched it against the payment method. The check proved Dad stole from us to build their pool. Her text said she had no idea where the money came from, that Dad told her he'd saved up for years. I forwarded the photo to Mom without comment. She called me 2 minutes later, her voice shaking but controlled, asking me to meet her at the bank that afternoon. She had decisions to make, and she wanted me there as backup. I drove home from campus, and we headed to the bank together around 2 o'clock. Mom walked up to the counter and asked to speak with someone about opening a new account. The representative led us to a small office with generic landscape photos on the walls. Mom explained she needed an account in only her name, completely separate from any joint accounts. The woman asked a few questions and started pulling up forms on her computer. Mom provided her driver's license, social security number, and employment information. She requested her paycheck be rerouted to the new account starting with the next pay period. Then she asked for printed statements from all existing joint accounts going back 6 months. The representative printed everything, and Mom spread the papers across the desk. She had a notebook and started writing down numbers, income from her job, bills we couldn't avoid, mortgage payment, utilities, car insurance, groceries. She crossed out anything that wasn't essential. No streaming services, no eating out, no extra spending. The math was brutal, but she kept working through it, her pen moving steadily down the page. After 30 minutes, she had a bare-bones budget that would keep us afloat on just her income. She looked exhausted when we finally left the bank, her shoulders slumped and her face pale. But in the car, she told me that knowing exactly what money we had felt better than the fog of not knowing. At least now she could plan instead of just reacting to each new disaster. By the end of that second week, reality was setting in about the holidays coming up. Nothing felt normal or worth celebrating. Mom sat Emma and me down at the kitchen table one evening after dinner. She had her budget notebook open in front of her. She told us she'd called our aunts and uncles and canceled our usual extended family plans for Christmas. Her voice was steady, but sad. Then she said the hardest part. We couldn't afford gifts this year, not with the legal fees and the mortgage payments and everything else piling up. She looked like she might cry saying it. Emma spoke first. She said she didn't want anything anyway except for this nightmare to end. I agreed immediately. The idea of pretending everything was fine enough to exchange presents felt wrong. Mom's eyes got watery, but she nodded and closed the notebook. We sat there for a while not talking, just existing together in our stripped-down reality. Meanwhile, Dad moved himself into a cheap month-to-month rental apartment across town. I only knew because he sent an email with his new address, like we might want to visit. But what really got under my skin was how he started sending different versions of events to each family. His emails to us painted the other wife as this manipulator who trapped him, claiming she got pregnant on purpose and threatened to ruin his life if he didn't marry her. He wrote paragraphs about how she was demanding and controlling, how she made him feel obligated to provide for her kids. But the other wife forwarded me the emails she was getting from him. In those messages, he blamed Mom for being cold and distant, said she'd let herself go after having kids, claimed she made him feel unwanted in his own home. He was rewriting history in real time, crafting separate narratives to make himself the victim in both stories. Reading them side by side made me want to throw my phone across the room. He couldn't even be honest about his dishonesty. Midweek 3, Mom had another meeting with Detective Walton at the police station. I went with her for support. Walton reviewed the documentation we'd provided and then gave Mom specific instructions. She needed to document every single time Dad tried to contact her outside of email. If he called, she should let it go to voicemail and note the date and time. If he showed up somewhere, she should write down where and when. Walton explained this created a paper trail in case Dad escalated or became threatening. He also suggested Mom send Dad a formal written communication boundary letter, not through email, but actual certified mail with a signature required. The letter would state clearly that all communication must happen through email only and that any in-person contact or phone calls would be considered harassment. Walton said judges took these boundary violations seriously when it came time for protective orders or custody issues. Mom nodded and took notes, her hand cramping from writing so fast. She asked if this meant Dad was dangerous. Walton said he couldn't predict behavior, but establishing boundaries early was always smart. Better to have the documentation and not need it than need it and not have it. By the end of week 3, Valerie Whitaker had prepared the paperwork for temporary orders. Mom and I met her at her office to review everything before filing. The documents requested exclusive use of the house for Mom, meaning Dad couldn't come back even to get his stuff without permission. They also asked for a freeze on all asset transfers, so Dad couldn't hide money or sell things, and they required all communication to go through email only, with supervised visits if he wanted to see Emma. Valerie walked Mom through each section, explaining what the judge would consider and what outcomes to expect. When they got to the signature page, Mom's hands were shaking, so hard she could barely hold the pen, but her jaw was set with determination. She signed her name firmly and dated each page. Valerie collected the documents and said she'd file them first thing Monday morning. Mom thanked her, and we left. In the car, Mom sat for a minute before starting the engine. She said it felt real now, like there was no going back. I told her there never was any going back, not after what Dad did. She nodded and started driving home. Early week 4, a thick envelope arrived in the mail addressed to Mom. Inside was a letter from Dad's attorney. I watched Mom read it and saw her face go pale. The letter threatened to contest the forgery claim, arguing that Mom must have known about the second mortgage. It suggested she was complicit in the fraud and trying to avoid responsibility by blaming everything on Dad. The letter used legal language that sounded intimidating and official. Mom's hands started shaking again as she read it a second time. She called Valerie immediately, and read the whole thing over the phone. Valerie's response was calm and matter-of-fact. She said this was a standard intimidation tactic that attorneys use to scare people into backing down. Our documentation was solid. We had Mom's work schedule proving she was at her job when the mortgage was signed. We had handwriting analysis showing the signature didn't match. We had the notary records that looked suspicious. Valerie told Mom to ignore the threats and trust the process. The evidence spoke for itself. Mom's fear didn't completely disappear, but it dropped from panic to manageable worry. She put the letter in her evidence file and tried to focus on other things. Midweek 4, Emma met with her school counselor again. She'd been having trouble with classmates asking questions about why she seemed upset or distracted. Some kids had seen her crying in the bathroom. Others noticed she stopped hanging out at lunch. The counselor helped Emma craft a simple script for handling these situations. Just one sentence. My parents are separating and I don't want to talk about it. Short, firm, not defensive. Emma practiced saying it out loud until it felt natural. That evening, she practiced with me at home. I played different classmates asking different versions of nosy questions. Emma repeated her script over and over, adjusting her tone until it sounded confident instead of angry or sad. By the end, she could say it without her voice shaking. It wasn't much, but it gave her some control over her own story at the school. End of week 4, another official-looking envelope arrived. This one was from Karen Dudley at Dad's company. Mom opened it carefully and read the single-page letter. It notified her that Dad remained on unpaid administrative leave while the company investigated expense report discrepancies. The letter was professionally vague, not giving specific details about what they'd found or what consequences Dad might face, but it confirmed they were taking the situation seriously and conducting a thorough review. Mom felt a small sense of validation reading it. At least someone besides us was holding Dad accountable. She filed the letter with everything else and marked the date on her calendar. Early week 5, Valerie called with another complication. She'd been reviewing our financial documents and flagged potential tax issues. If Dad had been claiming deductions for both households, the IRS might have questions. She referred Mom to a CPA who specialized in cases involving fraud and could file protective statements with the IRS. Mom looked overwhelmed when she hung up. Another professional to coordinate with. Another set of appointments and paperwork. Another layer of complexity to manage. I could see her getting tired of it all, worn down by the constant stream of problems. I helped her organize the tax documents Valerie had mentioned and called the CPA's office to schedule an appointment. The earliest opening was 2 weeks out. I took it and added it to Mom's calendar. She thanked me, but her voice sounded flat. I knew she was running on empty, but there wasn't any choice except to keep going. Midweek 5, Brooks called and asked Mom to come to the bank for a meeting about possible options. We drove there together and sat in his office while he pulled up spreadsheets on his computer screen. He explained the bank could offer a 90-day forbearance on the fraudulent mortgage payments, which would give us breathing room while the legal situation got sorted out. The catch was, we needed an official police report documenting the forgery before the bank could approve it. Brooks also mentioned the bank was conducting an internal review of how the loan got approved in the first place because the signature discrepancies should have been caught during processing. Mom took notes on everything he said, her handwriting shaky but legible. We left with a checklist of documents we needed to gather for the police report. End of week 5, Mom and I loaded up a thick folder with every piece of evidence we'd collected. Original mortgage documents with Mom's real signature, the fraudulent second mortgage application with the forged signature, specimen signatures from Mom's driver's license and old checks, bank statements showing the money trail. We drove to the police station and asked for Detective Walton. He met us in a small interview room and spread everything out on the table between us. Detective Walton went through each document carefully, taking photos with his phone and making notes in a leather notebook. He asked Mom specific questions about when she first learned about the second mortgage, whether she ever gave Dad permission to sign her name, what her typical signature looked like. Mom answered each question slowly and clearly, her voice steady even though her hands were clenched in her lap. The whole process took almost 2 hours. When we finally left, Mom looked completely drained, but she told me she felt relieved to have it officially documented. Early week 6, I was checking email when a message from the other wife popped up in my inbox. The subject line said, "Annulment filing, FYI," and my stomach tightened. I opened it and found a short message explaining she'd filed her annulment petition with the court that morning. She'd attached a copy of the filing so Mom could see what facts she was presenting and make sure their stories aligned. The email was brief and professional, but ended with a sentence acknowledging how weird it was that they were now allies working together to untangle Dad's lies. I forwarded it to Mom and watched her read it twice before she replied with a simple, "Thank you." Midweek 6, my phone rang while I was making lunch, and Detective Walton's name showed up on the screen. I answered, and he told me he had probable cause for forgery charges based on the signature analysis and Mom's testimony. Dad was booked and processed that afternoon. My heart started pounding, and I put the call on speaker so Mom could hear. Detective Walton explained Dad would probably be released on bail the same day, but now faced official criminal charges. After we hung up, Mom and I just sat there staring at each other. Knowing Dad was actually being arrested made everything feel more real and serious than it had before. End of week 6, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. This one wasn't sad like the last one. It was angry and confused, asking why everyone was being so mean to her daddy and why we were trying to hurt him. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I wrote back carefully, trying to explain that she was allowed to love her dad and feel upset about what was happening. But I also told her that adults have to face consequences when they break laws and hurt people, and that sometimes loving someone means holding them accountable. I hit send and hoped an 8-year-old could understand what I was trying to say. Early week 7, Valerie called Mom to say the court had set a hearing date for the temporary orders. She needed both Mom and the other wife to coordinate their schedules so they could both attend. Mom immediately texted the other wife, and they worked out their availability, sending Valerie a list of dates that worked for both of them. Later that week, Valerie called back to walk Mom through what to expect at the hearing. She explained how to stay calm if Dad's attorney tried to make her emotional or defensive, how to stick to facts instead of feelings, how to breathe through the stress of testifying. Midweek 7, Brooks called with what he described as cautiously good news. The bank had pre-approved the 90-day forbearance on the fraudulent mortgage payments while the criminal case moved forward. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it gave us breathing room to figure things out without immediate foreclosure pressure. When Mom hung up, she actually smiled for the first time in weeks. A real smile, not the fake ones she'd been forcing for Emma's benefit. End of week 7, I was upstairs in my room when I heard someone pounding on the front door. Heavy, aggressive knocking that made the whole door shake in its frame. I ran downstairs and found Mom standing frozen in the hallway, staring at the door. Dad's voice came through, loud and demanding, saying he needed to talk to her right now. Mom pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called the police. The pounding continued until we heard sirens approaching, then suddenly stopped. 2 officers arrived within minutes and found Dad sitting in his car at the curb. They talked to him for a while, then came to the door to tell Mom they'd warned him about violating his bail conditions by harassing a witness. Early week 8, Mom was going through Dad's old office looking for more tax documents when she found a crumpled receipt shoved in the back of a drawer. It was for an expensive anniversary gift, some kind of custom jewelry, charged to Mom's credit card last year. The date on the receipt matched the other wife's anniversary based on her Facebook posts. Mom stood there holding the receipt, her face tight and angry, but she didn't cry or yell like she might have weeks ago. She just took a photo of it, added it to our evidence file, and kept searching through the desk. Midweek 8, Mom had an individual session with Kendra to prepare for the upcoming court hearing. She was gone for over an hour and came home looking exhausted, but less scared than before. She told me Kendra had her practice testifying about the financial abuse, rehearsing how to explain what happened without breaking down in front of the judge. Mom said going through it multiple times in therapy helped her feel less terrified about facing Dad in court. She still wasn't looking forward to it, but at least now she had a plan for how to get through it without falling apart. End of week 8, Valerie called to confirm the hearing time and remind Mom to bring all the documentation we'd organized. Monday morning of week 9 arrived, and Mom put on her most professional outfit, her hands shaking as she buttoned her blouse. The other wife met us outside the courthouse at 8:30, dressed similarly formal, and they exchanged a quick nod before we all went through security together. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everything feel both official and oddly mundane. Dad sat at a table with his attorney, refusing to look at either wife as they took seats on the opposite side. The judge was a woman in her 50s who looked tired and impatient as she reviewed the stack of paperwork in front of her. Valerie presented our case methodically, walking through the forged mortgage, the financial abuse, the documented deception. Dad's attorney tried to argue that Mom must have known about the loan, that she signed documents willingly, but Valerie pulled out the signature analysis that clearly showed forgery. The judge asked Mom directly if she had any knowledge of the second mortgage before discovering it, and Mom's voice was steady when she said no, she had trusted her husband completely. The other wife was called to testify about the timeline of her relationship with Dad, and she spoke clearly about the lies he told, the fake identity he used, the way he manipulated both families. Dad's attorney tried to make her seem unreliable, suggesting she should have questioned things, but the judge cut him off sharply. After 2 hours of testimony and document review, the judge granted Mom temporary exclusive possession of the house and issued an order barring Dad from transferring, hiding, or disposing of any assets. She also extended the restraining provisions, making it clear Dad was only allowed contact through email and only regarding legal matters. Mom and the other wife walked out of the courtroom together, both looking exhausted but relieved, and I saw them squeeze each other's hands briefly before separating to their cars. Wednesday afternoon, Mom got a certified letter from Dad's company HR department, and her face went pale as she read it. Karen had formally extended Dad's unpaid administrative leave indefinitely pending resolution of the criminal forgery charges. The letter was professional and vague, but the message was clear. Dad had no income and no timeline for when he might have income again. Mom sat at the kitchen table with her calculator and our bank statements, running numbers over and over, her expression getting tighter with each calculation. That evening, she told Emma and me that we needed to be really careful with money for the foreseeable future, that this wasn't a temporary problem we could wait out. Emma asked if we'd have to move, and Mom said not if she could help it, but we all needed to pitch in and be smart about spending. By the end of week 9, our grocery trips looked completely different from they had a month ago. Mom was back to checking prices carefully, buying store brands, planning meals around what was on sale. She picked up 2 extra shifts at work, coming home so tired she could barely stay awake through dinner. I heard from the other wife that she'd started a part-time job at a retail store, working evenings after her kids were in bed with a neighbor watching them. The financial pressure was real and constant, but both families were managing somehow, refusing to let Dad's choices completely destroy us. Monday of week 10, Detective Walton called and asked me to come by the station to discuss the case status. I met him in the same small office where we'd filed the initial report, and he looked apologetic as he explained the DA's decision. They were moving forward with the forgery charge because the evidence was strong and clear, but the bigamy charge was uncertain. Technically, Dad had used different names, and the marriages might not both be legally valid, which made prosecution complicated. I felt frustrated hearing this, angry that Dad might escape full consequences because he'd been clever about his lies. Detective Walton seemed to understand, saying he knew it felt like imperfect justice, but some accountability was better than none. The forgery charge alone carried serious penalties and would create a criminal record that would follow Dad for the rest of his life. I left the station feeling conflicted, wanting Dad to face everything he'd done, but understanding the legal system had limits. Wednesday afternoon of week 10, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize asking if I could meet at Riverside Park. The message said it was from the other wife's son, the 12-year-old, and he wanted to talk to me if I was willing. I hesitated for a long time before responding, unsure what to say to this kid who was as much a victim as Emma and me. Finally, I agreed to meet him at 3 o'clock by the playground. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench and looking nervous. I sat down a few feet away, and we were both quiet for a minute. He asked me straight out if I hated his family, if I blamed them for what Dad did. I told him honestly that I hated what Dad did, that I was angry about the lies and the money and the way both our families got hurt, but I said none of it was his fault or his sister's fault, that he didn't choose any of this. He asked if I thought his mom knew, if she was lying too, and I could hear how scared he was of that possibility. I said I believed his mom didn't know, that she was lied to just like my mom was, that they were both victims of Dad's choices. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, awkward but real, and when he left, he looked a little less scared. Friday evening of week 10, I opened my email and found a message from Dad with the subject line, "You need to understand." I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me click it open. The email was long, several pages of text about Dad's childhood. His father left when he was 6, and his mother was controlling and cold, making him feel like he was never good enough. He wrote about growing up terrified of being abandoned, of being alone, of not being able to make people stay. He said he created 2 families because he couldn't bear the thought of losing either one, that he was trying to make sure he'd never be abandoned again. The email talked about his fear and his trauma and his desperate need to feel secure. I read the whole thing sitting at my desk, feeling this complicated mix of anger and sadness. Understanding where someone's damage comes from doesn't excuse what they do with it. Dad's trauma was real, but it didn't justify lying to 2 women for 16 years, stealing money, forging documents, hurting 6 kids. I felt sorry for the scared little boy Dad had been, but that didn't change what the adult Dad had chosen to do. Monday of week 11, Mom had an appointment with Valerie to formally file for divorce. She took the morning off work, and I went with her for moral support. Valerie had all the paperwork ready and walked Mom through each document, explaining what she was signing and what it meant. Mom's hand shook as she signed her name, tears running down her face, even though her expression stayed calm. At the same time, the other wife was filing her annulment petition at a different attorney's office, trying to legally erase a marriage that should never have existed. Both women were taking their lives back, reclaiming their identities separate from Dad's web of lies. Valerie said the divorce would take months to finalize, but filing was the first official step toward freedom. Wednesday of week 11, Brooks called with an update from the bank's fraud investigation team. They'd reviewed all the charges on Mom's credit card and determined that several of them were clearly fraudulent, charges Mom never made or approved. The bank was removing those charges from her balance, which helped but didn't solve everything. Mom was still responsible for the annual fees and interest that had accumulated, plus the legitimate charges Dad had made. Brooks helped Mom set up a payment plan that worked with her current income, spreading the remaining balance over 2 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was manageable, and we were slowly digging our way out of the financial hole Dad had created. Mom cried with relief when she hung up the phone, the first good financial news we'd had in months. Saturday of week 11, Mom called Emma and me into the living room for a family meeting. She had papers spread across the coffee table, budget spreadsheets and mortgage statements and housing listings. She said we needed to make a decision about whether to keep the house or downsize to something cheaper. Staying meant living under the forbearance agreement while saving every penny we could, hoping the legal process would eventually clear the fraudulent mortgage. Moving meant lower monthly costs, but giving up our home, our neighborhood, everything familiar. Emma started crying, saying she didn't want to leave, that Dad had already taken enough from us. I looked at the numbers and saw how tight it would be to stay, but I also saw how much this house meant to Mom and Emma. Mom was quiet for a long time, staring at the spreadsheets, before she finally said we were staying. This was our home, and Dad didn't get to take that from us too. We'd make it work somehow, all of us together. Monday morning of week 12, Mom met the other wife at a coffee shop halfway between their houses. They'd planned this meeting through careful emails, both wanting to talk privately about how to handle the ongoing situation with Dad and the kids. I didn't go, but Mom told me about it later that evening. They talked for over 2 hours about boundaries with the kids, about making sure none of the children felt caught in the middle or forced to take sides. They discussed Dad's continued manipulation attempts, the way he tried to play the families against each other in his emails. The other wife showed Mom some messages Dad had sent her, painting Mom as vindictive and cruel, and Mom showed her similar messages where Dad claimed the other wife was mentally unstable. They laughed bitterly at how transparent his tactics were when you could see both sides. They agreed to keep communicating, to share information when Dad tried his games, to present a united front against his manipulation. When they left the coffee shop, Mom said it felt strange but also right, like they were something close to friends now. Not because they wanted to be, but because they'd been through the same trauma and chosen not to let it define them or turn them against each other. Saturday of week 12, I pulled out my laptop and opened a fresh document. I needed to see everything in one place, needed to understand what had actually changed since Thanksgiving Day. I started typing. Legal protection, temporary orders granting Mom exclusive use of the house, criminal charges filed against Dad for forgery, Detective Walton building a case with solid evidence, therapy sessions every Wednesday with Kendra giving us actual tools to cope instead of just drowning, financial plans, the forbearance agreement buying us 90 days of breathing room while the bank investigated, clear boundaries, everything with Dad going through email only, no more manipulation through phone calls or surprise visits. I kept typing, listing it all out. Mom's new bank account in her name only, the other wife's annulment petition moving forward, Emma's script for handling questions at the school, the locks changed on our doors, our budget spreadsheet showing we could actually survive on Mom's income if we were careful. I stared at the list for a long time. So much remained broken and uncertain. The criminal case could take months or years. The fraudulent mortgage still hung over us like a weight. Dad kept sending emails trying to rewrite history and play victim. The other family's kids were hurting, and there was nothing we could do to fix that. But we weren't drowning anymore. We had solid ground under our feet, plans in place, people helping us navigate the legal mess. We knew the truth, and nobody could gaslight us into doubting it anymore. I saved the document and closed my laptop. Sunday evening, I drove to the police station with Dad's secret phone in my pocket. Detective Walton met me in the lobby, and I handed it over, explaining I had complete backups of everything stored securely in 3 different locations. He nodded and signed a receipt, promising to keep me updated on the case progress. The phone felt heavy leaving my hands after 12 weeks of carrying it everywhere, proof of everything Dad had done. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter somehow. That night, Mom made spaghetti, and we sat down together at the kitchen table, just the 3 of us. Emma had checked all the locks twice before sitting down, her new routine that made her feel safer. We ate slowly, nobody rushing through the meal to escape to separate rooms like we used to. The silence felt different from it had for the past 12 weeks. Not heavy with secrets or tension or fear, just quiet, peaceful, almost. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand, then Emma's. We were building something new from the wreckage Dad left behind. Slowly, carefully, but we were doing it together. So yeah, that's the whole thing. Just another weird little story that felt worth telling. Thanks for hanging out. It's always good company here. Come back whenever you feel like listening again.